back to another video. So today's video is going to be very gear focused. I've got two very different cameras here. I have the Hasselblad X2D, which if you are a subscriber to this channel, this should be very familiar for you. This is my main camera. I use this for pretty much everything. And this is the Canon 6D Mark II, which is the camera I had before the Hasselblad. So I got the Canon back in 2018, I believe. And the X2D, this particular one, the Earth Edition one, I just got, maybe a couple months ago, as soon as it was released. And so one of the big differences between these are obviously the price. So this Canon, I think when I got it new with the kit lens, was maybe around $2,000, $2,300, something like that. And the X2D was $14,000. Obviously, there's a number of years in technological differences and advancements in the X2D. And aside from this being a medium format camera and this being a full frame 35mm camera, this is 100 megapixels and this is 26 megapixels. So with basically 1/4 of the resolution, I want to figure out, does more megapixels always mean a better picture? So I'm down here in a small town called Waxhaw, which is on the border of North and South Carolina. I'm going to wander around a little bit and take photos with both of these. Some will be kind of a one-for-one shot, and then others will just be different, whatever catches my eye and whatever I have in my hand at the time. On the Canon, I have a 50mm f1.4 lens, and on the X2D, I have the XCD 55mm f2.5. So the lenses should be similar enough. They're not exactly the same, but close enough that I think we should be able to have a decent competition. Also, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to keep both of these cameras in 400 ISO. And honestly, for all the photos today, I'm not looking for anything portfolio worthy. This is not going to be my best work. I just thought it'd be a fun comparison with kind of the camera that I had for a while before I got the X2D and my current favorite, the X2D.
Alright, well, first things first, I need to remember how to use this camera. It's been probably a couple years since I've really used this at all, so let's go and start with this guy and remember how to use this damn thing. Do not have a lot of battery. Alright, well, we'll hope for the best. So we've got about an hour before sunset. As you can see, we've got really long shadows. I'm hoping I can use the light to my favor. We'll see. I don't know. I might run out of light before I get anything good. One of the things I definitely miss about the Canon is that shutter sound. Something about old SLRs, man. You still get that tactile mirror sound and it just, I miss it.
Okay, well, I'm really quickly losing the light, so I think this is going to wrap up the shooting portion of this. I haven't gone through I haven't looked at the photos at all yet, but I wanted to kind of give some kind of, I guess, first impressions or re-impressions of using this camera for the first time in about 2.5 years. I'm surprised at how bulky this camera feels now compared to the X2D. The X2D, I mean, is heavier, but it's all machined aluminum, it's metal, it feels very sturdy, it feels very reliable, and this probably has one of the best ergonomic grips that I've ever encountered in a camera. It's funny, I know that a big complaint with a lot of the Leica Q cameras is the horrible feel of the camera. It just doesn't fit well in people's hands. I haven't really used the Leica Q cameras much, so I can't speak too much to that, but again, ergonomically, I think the X2D is very, very good. The Canon just feels bulky and very plasticky, but again, there's a massive price difference, so I would expect that. Surprisingly, the autofocus on this 7-year-old camera. We're in December of 2024, and this camera came out in 2017. The autofocus still feels snappier and more responsive than this camera. Now, this camera obviously was not designed with really rapid, fast shooting in mind. If you're like a sports photographer, you're doing like races or something like that, obviously you're going to go to Canon, Nikon, Sony. But I was still really surprised with the significant time difference between these two cameras, that the Canon still felt faster to lock onto autofocus. The Hasselblad would still hunt on occasion with some weird lighting conditions. Now, speaking of lighting conditions, I'm expecting that the Hasselblad will do better because of its greater dynamic range in weird lighting conditions. So there was a couple of shots that I wanted to try to get very dramatic lighting, have really bright lights and also really dark shadows to try to emphasize that. So I'm really curious to see which one did better in those situations. Obviously the Hasselblad is going to win if you're looking at, like, you know, pixel peeping, if you're zooming in and cropping in an image, but I do still want to do that comparison just to kind of see how much of a difference there actually is and how much noise you're getting when you zoom into 100% with both the X2D and the 6D Mark II. Now, as I mentioned before when I was walking around, I miss the sound of the shutter on these cameras. There's something about the shutter sound on an SLR that it just, I don't know if it's nostalgia or what, I love the shutter sound on old SLR cameras. This is a mirrorless camera. The other thing about Hasselblad is, again, the shutter is actually in the lens, it's not in the body of the camera. So depending on what lens you have on this camera, the shutter sound will be entirely different. The 55V is going to sound different than the 90V, and that's going to sound different from the 28P, etc. Whereas with the Canon, obviously, no matter what lens you have on there, the shutter is going to sound the same because it's in the body. So again, I do miss that. As well-built and robust as the Hasselblad cameras are, the shutter sounds, to me, always sounds a little anemic. Sounds just a little weak. But again, personal preference, right? So since it's getting a little bit darker, I'm going to go home, load up all the images from both of these cameras, go in and edit them. I'm also going to have a couple of the raw images at the end of this video. So if you want to do just a base comparison, raw versus raw for these two cameras, I'll have a couple of those at the end. Alright, so obviously I'm back home now. I've gone through and I've edited all these photos kind of to how I would normally do it. One of the things that I forgot to mention earlier is that the Hasselblad also shoots in 6:4:5 format, or like a 3:4, whereas the Canon shoots natively in 2:3. So what I've done for all the photos that I want to do like a direct comparison between the two cameras is I've cropped the Hasselblad photos to that 2:3 aspect ratio so that it's a little bit harder to tell. It's not quite as obvious with just like the format of the photo. But it's been several days actually since I've taken a look at these, so I'm kind of excited to go in somewhat blind and do a comparison between these. These are the 24 photos that I've kind of selected to do, again, a side-by-side comparison. I shot more or less the same shot on both cameras with almost the exact same settings. I made sure that the ISO was set to 400 on both cameras, and I tried to make sure that the aperture was the same on both, but the shutter speed may have differed a little bit. Obviously, with there being a larger sensor in the Hasselblad and also slightly wider focal length, the exposure wasn't exactly the same on both cameras. But anyway, that aside, my point being just I tried to get it as close as I could to kind of the same settings on each camera. So let's take a look at some of these. Let's start out with this first one. Let's see, so honestly, again, all of these are edited. I will put raw files at the end of this video, so you can kind of take a look at these. But again, I wanted to kind of go through my workflow because I'm not showing raw files to anyone really, except for something like this, right? But any photographs that I'm producing, I'm not just going to show the raw file. So I thought it was useful to go in, edit the photos as I would normally to get the look that I'm looking for, and then display that. And again, none of these photos are really that great. They were really just done as a demonstration to try to showcase the differences in the cameras. So none of these are like portfolio worthy pieces. So the thing that kind of caught my eye about this scene, other than the really interesting embroidered graffiti, I don't know really what to call this on this back wall here, it was really cool, but I liked that kind of bag that was hung up on the power line in the upper right corner. The reason for that was I thought that it was going to be a more challenging aspect for the lighting. And I noticed that when I initially shot the photos in the RAW on the Canon, it was almost entirely blown out. But with editing, I was able to bring it back down. I'll be honest, I don't remember if we're looking at the Canon photo or the Hasselblad photo in this one. So, I mean, the highlights held up pretty well on this one. I feel like there's not quite as much detail in the sky. Let's look at this deli photo, right? So same kind of thing here. I wanted to get the really kind of dramatic lighting to check out the dynamic range. There's another photo that I did that with as well, and we'll take a look at a second. But I don't want to zoom in too much because I think, again, that'll kind of give it away in terms of the pixel peeping there. But just looking at some of the lighting and the detail, I mean, I'm happy with this shot in terms of the technical aspect of it, right? The lighting, the coloring. You know, I was able to edit this the way that I would like to normally. Let's look at the other shot. Same thing here. I think that the colors are a little bit more vibrant. And I mean, obviously, yes, I could change that with saturation, vibrancy within my edits. But I mean, even in the edit that I've done here, right, I'm kind of going back and forth. I feel feel like the white balance is a little bit better. On both, the focus is pretty sharp. I mean, I don't have any complaints about the focus on these two shots. There's another one that I have a complaint about the focus on. Actually, let's look at that really quickly. Let's jump ahead. So on this one, I'm pretty sure that this is, again, the Hasselblad, because the bike, if you notice, is nicely in focus. And I mentioned before that the Canon was faster with the autofocus, but I actually noticed it wasn't as accurate. What I mean by that is trying to focus again on the bike, and I'm pretty sure this is the Canon one, because if you notice, the bike is actually a little fuzzy. What's really sharp in focus is actually ahead of the bike, and these two bike rack things. Otherwise, pretty similar in terms of what we can get from the photo, from the visuals, right? The other example of this was, I believe, in this one. So again, kind of same thing here. I was trying to focus on this weird sculpture structure thing here in the center, right? And I feel like it actually caught further over here. And this was done at a really, really shallow depth of field. This is probably max aperture. Taking a look here, this is much more in focus. And again, I'm not looking at like pixelation for the resolution. I'm just talking about the focus is nice and sharp on this. So even though the Canon was faster to acquire focus, it actually feels like that the Hasselblad was more accurate in what I was trying to focus on. There's probably camera settings you can tweak to make sure that you're kind of getting exactly what you want. And it's been a while since I've worked with the camera, so there might have been a broader field of focus that I was trying to look for. So maybe that's on me. I don't want to necessarily blame the camera for that, but it was something I noticed in some of the images. This is another photo that I took with both cameras, and I wanted to really highlight the dynamic range for these two cameras, right? So you have a very harsh lighting condition here. You've got the sun blasting the side of this building. The other side is completely in shadow. And obviously with editing, I was able to bring up the shadows and darken the highlights a little bit so that this is pretty well exposed, in my opinion. There are a couple true blacks where, you know, the shadows just kind of fall off. Maybe a couple really bright highlights where it gets blown out. But looking at this other photo, kind of same thing. I was able to bring back the shadows and subdue the highlights enough that, again, I'm happy with the overall exposure of this shot. Now, something that I recall from when I was editing these is I had to do more to the Canon file to kind of bring it back into a more even exposure, whereas the Hasselblad I didn't have to do as much. However, it is possible. So again, going back to this shot here, let's see, again, I don't want to do like pixel peeping on this quite yet. We'll get to that in a little bit. But overall, I'm really happy with how the shadow retention worked, how the highlight retention worked for this shot. And going to the other file, again, I think this is probably the Canon, because if you notice the highlights on the left side here, you do get a little more blown out, just pure whites in the brick. And some of the shadows I don't think pulled out as much, even not zooming in, they look a little noisier to me. Maybe that's just like a placebo effect or something, but they don't seem quite as detailed as this shot. Yeah, I feel like I can see more detail in the shadows with this shot, and then even some of the highlighting that's happening on the left-hand side isn't clipped as much. I still feel like I'm getting more detail in that brick. All right, so let's do some pixel peeping. That I'm sure will be the dead giveaway, and then we can kind of go back and confirm which set is which, right? So let's take a look at this house. I really like this, just the lighting of it, the shadows that were going across the structure. So let's go in and really kind of zoom in on this. So this is very, very sharp. You can get a lot of detail. I mean, hell, I can almost read whatever that plaque is on the door there. I'm going to assume that this is the Hasselblad file. The detail that you get in this just really kind of gives it away. I mean, you can see the weave pattern in the chairs here, the grain in the wood very well. You get a lot of detail in the flag. I love you can see kind of the frayed edge of the flag on the left side there. That's really cool too. And let's go back to our other file. Zoom in here. So you can see some of the fraying on that flag, but like, I don't know that I would necessarily pick up on that had I not seen it in the other file, right? I would just be like, oh yeah, flag, cool. Same thing over here. Yeah, you're already getting a lot more noise, so this is definitely the Canon file. You don't really get any of the detail in the chair. You can get some of the wood grain a little bit, but not much. But again, this is zooming in a lot, right? I think if you're just looking at these two files side by side, either one looks fine. Again, I'm not saying that they're great photographs. I'm just saying that the image that you get from either one of these is acceptable in either case, right? So let's go back to this first one and check. And yes, this is in fact the Hasselblad. Again, kind of a giveaway, but I figured. And this is the Canon one. So let's go back and look at the first ones that I did here. So this one that I was talking about, this dynamic range on the bag up here. Again, I assumed that this was the Hasselblad because I started to zoom in already a little bit to kind of look at the detail in that bag, but just the detail that you get without getting those blown highlights. Yeah, and this is the Hasselblad shot. And the Canon one, again, you get more of those clipping with the highlights a little bit more. But again, not bad, right? It's closer than I would have thought, actually. So this first set that I've selected, these are all the Hasselblad shots. The other ones are all the Canon shots. Let's take a look at a couple of these other ones. Again, I really like the color rendition on this. I feel like even though I made it to be a little bit of a warmer tone because I wanted to emphasize that sunset light, you still have a nice retention of the cool tones in this shot, right? All these blues and teals down here. This one did pretty well, but I feel like for the coloring, you don't really get as much range in the color. Now, the teals and the chairs here feel kind of washed out to me. They don't really pop as well. Looking at lighting again, I think these files are actually a pretty good example of this. At even edited, I feel like you have a greater range of tones and lighting conditions within this frame versus the same shot on the Canon. The whites feel almost too exposed. I'm not getting the depth in the color and the lighting that I really want. This isn't bad in terms of like, we still have details in the shadows in the back here. You can see these chairs with the sun on them pretty nicely. Now again, something that's very important that I want to emphasize here is that as I've been talking through all these things, my opinions on these photos, they're just that. They're my opinions based on my work, based on how I prefer to shoot. You may absolutely look at some of these files and not like my edits, that's fine. You might think that the Canon files look better, that's fine too. For me, the biggest takeaway with looking at both of these sets of images side by side like this is actually how close they are. I was really expecting more of a discrepancy between these two cameras and what they could produce. But again, especially for posting something like on social media, even YouTube where the videos are 4K, I don't know that you'd have a hard time getting good image quality out of an old camera like the Canon 6D Mark II. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put up all of these photos side by side in kind of a slideshow format so that you can see, you can compare, you can pause, look at both of them as you like, and then we'll come back for our final conclusions. Right, okay, so conclusion time. There are two main questions that I think this video is trying to answer. The first one is, do megapixels matter? Do you need to spend the money on getting a 100 megapixel camera, medium format, or are you okay getting a used full frame camera that shoots 26 megapixels? In my opinion, from reviewing the files, I can confidently say that no, I don't think that megapixels make or break a photo. I think that you can still get great image quality, especially for most applications that people are going to be shooting for with a lower megapixel count camera. Is it cool to be able to pixel peep and zoom in and see a bunch of detail? Yeah, absolutely. But are most people going to be doing that, especially if you're doing anything printed? Well, they can't, right? So no, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. I think for a while, megapixel count was kind of the arms race of the photo world, right? There was just this competition to see who could churn out more and more and more megapixels. And while the technology has advanced, and undeniably that's a good thing for us, the consumer, I don't think that photographers need to be dissuaded from looking at older cameras if they're trying to get into photography, especially. Back when I was a student in college, I certainly didn't have the money for a really expensive camera like this. So I was shooting everything on a Canon T3i, and even that at the time was an expensive camera to me. I mean, it was a couple $100s, I think. So again, the first question, do megapixels matter? No. The second question is, why then would I spend all of this money getting a Hasselblad X2D if this still works? Well, as I've spoken about in other videos, this camera means a lot to me personally. As I just said, when I was in college, I couldn't afford something like this. And I remember going into B&H Photo in New York and seeing at the time the X1D and being completely blown away. I mean, 50 megapixels, right? Oh my God, a medium format digital camera. I fell in love with medium format when I was in college, but that was medium format film. Looking at other digital medium format cameras, they were so expensive at the time. Many of them still are. And it was kind of one of those things that for me personally, it was like, oh man, one day, right? One day, if I can ever afford something like this, like that would just be, well, right? That would be the dream. So do I need this camera? No. Am I incredibly proud to be able to have this camera? Yes. I think throughout your time as a photographer, you're always going to have that gear acquisition syndrome, right? GAS. A lot of photographers on YouTube have talked about that in the past. And honestly, especially when YouTubers are getting brand deals and everything else, they profit off of that, wanting you to spend money on more gear, more lenses, more camera bodies, more lights, more this, more that, more tripods, whatever it is. I'm a very small YouTuber. I just started this channel 6 months ago. I don't have brand deals. I don't have sponsors. I'm not telling you have to go out and buy a Hasselblad. I'm not telling you have to go out and get a Canon instead of a Nikon or a Sony. I don't really care. Whatever works for you is going to work for you. And what works for me, what I enjoy shooting, what I get inspired to go use is the Hasselblad. And to me, that's what it comes down to. Your gear should be a tool for you that you can create with. However that works out for you. For me, I had this camera for years and never really found the inspiration to go out and shoot. I started to kind of finally get back into photography more. And then as soon as I got my first Hasselblad, the 907X, I all of a sudden wanted to be out shooting all the time just to use the damn thing. And ultimately, what's going to make you a better photographer is shooting, taking photographs, figuring out what works, what doesn't, trying different compositions, trying different lighting techniques. That is what's going to make you better, not the gear. So for me, my opinion is that where the gear helps is when the gear can help inspire you to go and do more and push yourself further. You as the artist is what's creating the photograph, not really the camera. The camera is just the tool to capture the image. That's it. But why I love the Hasselblad and why I continue to shoot with it and why I choose this system is that it inspires me to want to go out and do more, to shoot more, to push myself further. I'm not saying that you can't have that with a Canon. I personally just never did. And that's all it really is. Also, I think a lot of you that have seen my other videos on the Hasselblad have seen other YouTubers where they were gifted an X2D in exchange for a video by Hasselblad. Again, this was not gifted to me. I bought this myself. So please don't be fooled by YouTube by thinking that you have to have something like this. This is just what I choose for myself. One of my friends, Sam Vargas, who I'll link down below, shoots pretty much everything on Sony, and he's an incredible photographer and videographer. I highly encourage you to go check out his work. And again, I understand that not everyone's going to be able to relate to my videos if they think that, oh, well, he's getting those shots because of the Hasselblad. First, if you think that, you probably don't know much about photography, and that's fine. If you're new to it, I understand. But also, there's a lot of other really great YouTubers out there that are able to kind of distill things down, that are here to teach you about photography, teach you how to properly expose an image, teach you about depth of field and aperture and shutter speeds and all of its effects on the photo that you create. I'll be honest, That's not why I'm here. I'm not really here to teach you how to be a photographer. So my point is this. Don't be fooled by YouTube into thinking that you have to get the most expensive gear that you can get your hands on. Going back to when I was in Morocco with National Geographic, the Nat Geo photographer that was with us, Sissy Brimberg, shot pretty much the entire trip on her iPhone. She wasn't using a big professional camera like one of these. Apparently, she told me later that there's a couple of people on our tour group that thought that I was the Nat Geo photographer just because of the camera that I had, which I thought was just really funny. Because there is obviously a perception of these tools that we use, but at the end of the day, they're just that. They're just tools. Find the tools that work for you. Go out, be inspired, create things. That ultimately is what's most important. Anyway, this video was a lot of me rambling. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you took something from this. Again, ultimately, if you're watching this, I just want you to be inspired. I want you to go out and make things for yourself. Create your own artwork. So again, I hope that you liked the video. Please consider liking and subscribing if you're new here. I really, really appreciate the support. As of making this, I just surpassed 800 subscribers, which is a huge deal. Thank you very much for everyone that has clicked that subscribe button. It's mid-December right now as I'm filming this, so to be honest, I'm probably going to take a couple weeks off for the holidays. But happy holidays to you all. Have a great new year, and I will see you in the next one.